Hey guys, tonight we're going to wander barefoot across the sun-baked stones of the Persian desert, where the heat swells in waves and the air shimmers with dry silence. You pause under the inky blue of a desert night, stars punching holes in the sky, and, believe it or not, you're holding a bowl of ice-cold dessert. Maybe it's a slushy blend of mountain snow, sour grape syrup, and a hand of rosewater. Maybe it's just frozen milk with cardamom. Either way, it's cold. In the middle of the desert. In the middle of summer. In 500 BC. You probably wouldn't survive this little journey. Let's be honest, no sunscreen, no air conditioning, no iced coffee on demand. Just dust, camels, and the distant hum of locusts. But hey, you've got ancient Persian sorbet, and that counts for something, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere warm, tell me where you are and what time it is. Always curious who else is still awake with me. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch gently on the cracked earth. In the distance, domes rise like half-buried moons, massive, conical structures with open tops. They look out of place, like someone dropped a fleet of alien beehives across the sand. These are Yakhchals, literally ice pits. They're not palaces, not temples. They're fridges. Gigantic, passive refrigerators built by the ancient Persians to store winter's bounty well into summer's wrath. The concept seems impossible at first glance. It's over 100 degrees Fahrenheit by day, and you're standing next to what is essentially a desert ice cream cooler from 2,500 years ago. And yet, it worked. Historians still debate whether early versions existed even before the Achaemenid Empire, but by the time of Darius the Great, ice storage was a royal obsession. You, my sleepy time traveler, are a low-ranking court official sent to inspect the summer supply at one of the empire's prized Yakhchals. Your tunic sticks to your back. Your sandals are melting into the sand. But the moment you duck inside the shadow of the mud brick dome, something magical happens. You feel cool air. Not air-conditioned. Not breezy. But unmistakably cooler. A hushed whisper of chill seeps out from the deep core of the structure, like the desert exhaling in reverse. The Persians had no electricity, but they had time, math, and a stubborn refusal to let the desert win. They placed Yakhchals carefully, away from cities, in valleys where night air pooled and sun exposure was minimal. They dug deep, often over 20 feet, to create a shaded cavity lined with heat-reflective mortar. The mud brick domes, thick as elephant skin, were built in layers with natural insulation, clay, ash, straw, even camel hair. Imagine standing at the mouth of one, peering into the pit where months earlier, blocks of ice had been laid down like slabs of treasure. It's July now. The sun has turned your teeth into radiators. But here, it's still cool. The ice is shrinking, yes, but not gone. That's the brilliance. Even modern engineers admit admiration. With no metal, no freon, no compressors, these ancient Persians harnessed passive cooling, the idea that you can manage temperature using airflow, shade, insulation, and the physics of evaporation. You'll hear more about that in a bit. For now, just marvel that someone built a freezer before the concept of freezing food was even widespread. Mainstream historians agree that the Achaemenid court, think Cyrus, Darius, Xerxes, all the tall hat guys from your old history book, used these Yakhchals to store not just snow, but treats made from it. The Persians were one of the first civilizations to obsess over temperature-controlled desserts. Because when you're ruling the biggest empire the world had ever seen, room temperature pudding just won't cut it. But while the emperors were licking snow cones, the workers were hauling ice. That's where your real night journey begins. You close your eyes, imagining the long lines of servants trudging through the Zagros Mountains. Snowfall came hard and fast in those upper peaks. In late winter, teams were dispatched to harvest it, yes, harvest snow. Wrapped in oiled cloth and packed into goatskin bags, the snow was heaved onto camels or sleds and hauled down to the desert. One rogue theory suggests some ice wasn't harvested at all, but made right in the desert through ingenious nighttime freezing techniques using shallow pools, evaporative cooling, and windcatchers. We'll get to that soon. For now, picture the caravan. Each step is crunching snow into slush. The air grows warmer with each mile. And still, they press forward. Ice for the king. Ice for the feasts. Ice for the glory of the empire. There's an odd serenity in this rhythm, like the soft scrape of footsteps in snow, even when you're long past the snow line. So here you are, in the cool twilight of a mud dome, chewing on an ancient slushie, contemplating how a civilization beat the heat with nothing but mud, mountain snow, and a complete disregard for what's practical. You yawn. That cold dessert starts to taste sweeter the more you slow down. And as the stars stretch further across the sky, you find yourself wondering, who first thought of this? Who looked at the blistering sun and thought, you know what would go great right now? Frozen syrup. Whoever they were either a genius or deeply sleep-deprived and dreaming of snow. Your breath fogs slightly as you step deeper into the Yakhchal. It's faint, barely there, but it's a small miracle in this furnace of a land. The walls curve inward like the inside of a conch shell, climbing upward toward a pinhole of sky. Somewhere down below, stacked beneath woven mats and buried under sawdust or straw, lie the remains of last winter's snow, transformed by time and alchemy into cold luxury. You're not alone in here, of course. A whisper of movement, bare feet shuffling. A servant offers you a sliver of icy dessert on a carved wooden dish. You take it. Rose water hits your tongue like perfume. Tangy pomegranate follows. Sweet, cold, fleeting. It melts almost immediately, but that first shock of chill? Heavenly. You're not royalty, not exactly, but you're close enough to benefit. The real snow lords, though, are in Persepolis. And at the top of that frosty food chain is none other than the King of Kings. The Achaemenid rulers weren't just warlords with good beards. They were connoisseurs. They liked their scrolls long, their jewelry gaudy, and their refreshments cold. Darius I, especially, had a fondness for elaborate courtly pleasures. Historians still argue whether his obsession with chilled wine and syrupy frozen fruit mixtures was ceremonial, medicinal, or simply indulgent, but one thing is clear, milk cost was too great for a cool treat in the desert. And cost it did. To feed a royal craving for frozen pomegranate in July, hundreds of laborers had to scale mountains, carve ice, pack it, transport it, then tuck it away like treasure. All to satisfy a single moment of elite refreshment. The average citizen, meanwhile, cooled off the old-fashioned way, with shade, patience, and dreams. You wonder what the king's face looked like after that first frosty bite. Did his beard tremble? Did he grimace and say, "Too cold"? Or did he just sit back, eyes closed, savoring the quiet defiance of nature? Because make no mistake, this wasn't just dessert. This was domination. To chill a sorbet in July was to declare mastery over geography itself. A flex, if you will. The king's sweet tooth was a statement of power, and the chilled syrup a small revolution in a ceramic bowl. Court records are sparse, mostly administrative tablets and royal proclamations, but we do know from inscriptions and archaeological finds that ice storage and summer desserts were logistically prioritized. Some clay tablets hand out procurement lists that include snow, fruit syrups, honey, and saffron. And while nobody wrote down the exact moment when the first Persian noble clinked a frozen fig into a cup of wine, you can imagine it happening, maybe after a long military campaign, or perhaps to impress visiting dignitaries from Egypt or Lydia. Speaking of Lydia, foreign visitors often left confused by the Persians' obsession with winter luxuries. Herodotus, ever the gossip, notes with dry amusement how Persians enjoyed dressing lavishly, eating richly, and, when possible, cooling down while the rest of the region roasted. But there's something tender about this, too. You imagine a prince, sweating through his silk robes, remembering the mountain snow of his childhood. Perhaps the first spoonful of icy date syrup was less about opulence and more about nostalgia, a cold memory of winter brought to life in the hottest days of the year. Quirkier still? There are scattered folk stories, not academically confirmed, but charming nonetheless, about royalty sending love notes wrapped around chunks of ice. Delivered on camelback, of course. My love burns hotter than the desert sun, it might say, but this snow will cool your skin till I return. Okay, sure. Cheesy. But admit it, you'd watch that rom-com. Even the logistics read like a fantasy. Some Yakhchals were connected to qanats, underground aqueducts, providing fresh water and, crucially, helping with insulation. You picture a network of tunnels, dark and damp, running like veins beneath the empire, ensuring that the king's grapes were chilled and his melon slices frosted. Was it practical? Hardly. Efficient? Not really. But the goal wasn't survival, it was supremacy, leisure, and a little bit of culinary magic. Still, historians debate, were these desserts widespread at court, or exclusive to the king? Did lower-ranking nobles and elite families have many ice pits of their own, or was it all centralized and controlled like grain storage? There's evidence pointing both ways, and scholars have spilled much ink, and perhaps a few imaginary pints of ice cream, debating it. What no one denies, however, is the effort. The scale. The desert was never meant to give up its heat easily. And yet, here you are, savoring chilled rose-flavored slush while cicadas scream in the background. You sit now on a worn stone bench near the Yakhchals base. A carved pattern of cypress trees winds across the wall. Persians love their symbols of life and eternity. You run a hand across the design. It's smooth. Cold to the touch. Somehow even the stone feels like it remembers snow. This isn't just about food, you realize. It's about memory. Legacy. And yes, a stubborn refusal to let the desert win. The sun hasn't even risen yet, but the horizon is already humming. You're on the outskirts of a village in northern Persia, somewhere near the Elburz Mountains. The air is crisp here, so crisp that you can smell snow in it. Not the blizzard kind, but the quiet kind, settled and ready to be taken. And that's exactly what everyone around you is doing. Welcome to the snow harvest. It's not glamorous. You're standing beside a string of donkeys wrapped in blankets, surrounded by men with pickaxes, baskets, and calloused hands. There's not a royal robe in sight, just sweat, steam, and the crunch of feet on hard-packed snow. You're here to see how the snow destined for Persian Yakhchals begins its journey, up in the mountains, with muscle and frostbite. You trudge behind a group of snow harvesters, each carrying an oddly shaped spade that looks more like a wide wooden paddle than a tool of empire. The leader, an older man with a beard like icicles, grunts in your direction. Keep your feet wide. Snow hides holes. Noted. Each year, after the heaviest snows have fallen, these workers make the trek into high altitudes. They camp up here in rough shelters for days, even weeks, depending on the haul needed. Snow is not just gathered, it's chosen. The best kind is dry-packed, dense, not too powdery. Ideal for compressing into blocks. Ideal for surviving the journey home. You help fill a woven basket, patting down layers of snow, careful not to let warm hands linger. Then it's wrapped in canvas, tied with hemp rope, and packed into large leather satchels. There's a method here, refined over generations. Each snow block is layered with straw or sawdust, not for flavor, let's hope, but insulation. One worker even adds a pinch of salt to the outer layers, muttering that it keeps evil warmth out. Historians still argue whether salt really played a role in ancient Persian snow storage or if that's a later folk remedy, but it's a good excuse for you to wipe your hands and move on. The caravan begins its descent. It's a long, slow slog. Some paths are barely wide enough for a donkey, let alone a fully loaded sled. You pass through pine forests, narrow gullies, and, at one point, a patch of rock that echoes like a drum beneath your feet. The mountain is alive, and you're disturbing its nap. About halfway down, the team pauses at a familiar resting point, an ancient fire circle, used every winter. The fire's out now, of course, no one wants snow near flames, but it's tradition to stop here. Someone passes around dried dates and almonds. You chew slowly, watching puffs of breath rise into the morning air. You're tired, but you can't help smiling. Because you're part of a tradition so old, even the mountains don't question it anymore. This practice wasn't limited to one village. Throughout the empire, snow caravans operated in winter and spring, coordinated loosely by regional governors or estate lords. Some were official, commissioned for royal stores. Others were local operations, run by families who sold snow to merchants, perfumers, and even apothecaries. That's right, snow had medical value, too. In hotter months, physicians recommended cool compresses, chilled drinks, and sometimes even shaved ice flavored with vinegar and herbs. There's one slightly odd recipe, preserved in later Persian medical texts, that suggests snow infused with crushed basil to cool the fire in the liver. Historians still debate whether this was literal fire or metaphorical heat imbalance. Either way, basil snow doesn't sound half bad. Quirkier still? Some aristocratic families used snow in rituals, freezing small tokens or flowers inside ice balls, then melting them as symbolic offerings. Was it magic? Poetry? Passive-aggressive social commentary? The records are unclear, but the imagery is beautiful. As you descend, the temperature rises. You shed a layer, wipe your forehead. The donkeys snort more, resisting the warmth. Snow begins to sweat beneath its wrappings. This is the most delicate stretch of the journey. If the cargo overheats now, it's all for nothing. One worker lifts a satchel and shakes his head. Leaking already, he sighs. You reach the Yakhchal compound by early afternoon. It's shaded, built into a hillside. Children run alongside the caravan, shouting greetings. Someone's already opening the heavy wooden doors. Inside, a long ramp leads downward. You follow, careful not to slip. Workers whisk blocks of snow into place, stacking them like oversized sugar cubes. Straw is layered in between like cake filling. You can feel the cool air settling in again. There's no fanfare. No trumpets. Just tired smiles, cracked lips, and one muttered prayer to the mountain spirits. The snow made it. Not all of it, but enough. You sit on a low wall and watch the last satchel get emptied. The Yakhchal echoes faintly with the sound of dripping water. Somewhere above, a windcatcher groans softly as it channels cool air downward. It's not just logistics. It's ritual. A cycle. Snow falls. Snow is gathered. Snow is preserved. And later, snow becomes refreshment, medicine, or memory. And somewhere, far away, a king will sip chilled wine and never once think about the donkey that slipped on a rock halfway down the pass. Back in the lowlands, you're starting to notice something odd about these Persian Yakhchals. They don't just survive the heat, they ignore it. You walk a slow circle around one now, your fingers trailing over its outer wall. The mud brick dome rises steeply, tapering toward the sky like an upside-down ice cream cone. No windows. No cracks. Just thick, sun-baked earth, silent and smug. You crouch, peer at the base. The walls are absurdly thick, several feet in some places. This isn't careless brickwork. This is strategy. You've reached the part of our sleepy little journey where engineering takes center stage. Don't worry, no math homework required. Just lean back, take a breath, and imagine building a walk-in freezer out of mud, in the desert, before the invention of thermometers. You'd start with materials. The Persians weren't just slapping together mud huts. They made something called saruj, a special waterproof plaster composed of clay, lime, ash, egg whites, goat hair, and sometimes even bull's blood. That's right, your dreamy snow cocoon might smell faintly of omelet and livestock. Delightful. This concoction made the Yakhchals water-resistant, heat-resistant, and remarkably durable. A few even survived into the 20th century, though by then, ice cream was more likely to come from a freezer truck. The dome shape wasn't just aesthetic. It minimized surface area exposed to sunlight and allowed hot air to rise naturally to the top, away from the stored snow. That tiny opening at the peak, it acted like a pressure valve, letting excess heat out while cooler air settled below. Historians still argue whether the dome's angle was standardized across the empire or adjusted based on geography. What's clear is that the geometry wasn't random, it was tuned for survival. But the real genius? The trench. Beneath most Yakhchals lay a deep pit or channel, sometimes 15 to 20 feet below ground level. Snow blocks were layered here, far from sunlight, compressed by weight and occasionally misted with water to encourage freezing. The lower the snow sat, the cooler it stayed. In fact, the temperature in those pits could drop low enough overnight to make ice, without snow. We'll touch more on that in the windcatcher chapter, but for now, just know, the Yakhchal wasn't just storage, it could create cold from nothing but architecture and atmosphere. You plop down beside the trench. Dust floats in a golden beam of sunlight leaking through a vent. Somewhere above, a goat bleats. Below, silence. It's cool in here. Not cold like a walk-in freezer, but cool enough that your sweat dries quickly. You sigh. If only your kitchen had one of these. They worked best when the builders respected the local conditions. Ideal locations were shady in summer, dry year-round, and nestled into low-lying terrain where nighttime air could pool. Sometimes Yakhchals were built near cannons, so that cold groundwater could seep into the base and boost cooling. Some had tall earthen walls on their southern sides, just tall enough to throw perpetual shade on the structure during peak sunlight. And they didn't work alone. These weren't standalone miracles. Yakhchals were part of a system, connected to water management, labor hierarchies, seasonal rhythms, and even religious symbolism. The domes, often painted white to reflect heat, became landmarks in the community, silently promising relief in months to come. Quirkier records mention Yakhchals doubling as community spaces. In cooler seasons, their shaded outer walls hosted markets. Children played games on the tamped clay nearby. One folk account even describes a young couple meeting and eventually marrying beside a Yakhchal, where our hearts thawed and the snow did not. Very poetic. Also, quite cold for a date spot. Now, let's get cozy with the numbers. A well-built Yakhchal could store up to 180 cubic meters of ice. That's nearly 50,000 gallons of frozen delight. Some models had step-chambered floors to separate snow from runoff. Drainage was key. If water sat too long, it heated up the surrounding air. Not ideal when your king expects a frozen plum slice in July. And yes, even then, maintenance crews were on the job. Ice checkers, straw turners, trapdoor inspectors. Every pit had a system. Some had flags outside to indicate how full they were. Red thread meant melting. Blue meant still solid. No thread. Someone's about to be in trouble. Historians still wonder how much of this was recorded formally. Did cities have official snow ledgers? Did anyone get fined for bad insulation? One tantalizing clue, an unearthed inscription near modern-day Kerman lists what may be a fine force spoiling the king's chill. Whether that was ice or mood-related, we may never know. You lean against the inner wall and close your eyes. Somewhere far above, the desert sun blazes on. But down here, time slows. Everything is dim, soft, and measured. There's something oddly modern about it all. The insulation techniques. The passive airflow design. The intentional shade casting. Today's architects would call this green building. The Persians just called it smart. And you? You call it a nap waiting to happen. You're sitting at the edge of a low table now, somewhere within the shaded courtyards of a summer palace. The sun is high but defeated, the air here is still, the breeze faint but oddly cool. Your cup is frosted. Literally. Frost beads on the sides, melting slowly into a ring of condensation on the polished stone surface. You take a sip. It's sweet, floral, cold. Persian ice cream, ancient style. Yes, you heard that right. Ice cream. Or something like it. Tonight, you're biting, slowly, carefully, into the chilled legacy of one of the earliest known cold desserts in history. And it doesn't come in a waffle cone. What you're eating is probably called faluda, or a close ancestor of it. Today, it's a semi-frozen delight made of thin vermicelli noodles, semi-syrupy rose water, lime juice, and sometimes a hint of saffron. But way back when, it likely began much simpler: snow, syrup, a bit of thickened grape juice, and a lot of imagination. The original version had fewer frills. Take some fresh-packed snow or shaved ice from the Yakhchal, mix it with fruit syrup, maybe pomegranate, maybe mulberry, and serve it immediately. The key wasn't complexity. It was coldness. Cold was a novelty. Cold was an art. Cold meant the king noticed your effort. You swirl your spoon through the icy mix. A servant brings out a second version, this one denser, almost like frozen custard. No dairy, though. Milk spoils fast out here. Instead, it's thickened with starch and sweetened with honey. Rose petals float on top, decorative but edible. You take another bite. Your molars zing. Worth it. Historians still argue whether what we now call Persian ice cream, Bastani Sunnati, actually originated in the Achaemenid period or emerged later during the Qajar dynasty, with its infusion of milk, eggs, and crushed pistachios. But the idea of frozen sweets, that's old. Very old. And the Achaemenids were undoubtedly chilling desserts long before gelato was a twinkle in an Italian's eye. You watch as a royal banquet is laid out in slow, elaborate fashion. Copper platters, ornate jugs, fruits arranged in pyramids of gleaming red and gold. At the center, a shallow silver dish, fogging at the edges. Inside, a shimmering heap of frozen nectar, possibly tamarind, possibly honey lemon, possibly whatever was in surplus that season. The dishes aren't just food, they're power displays. No one else in the known world can eat something this impractical. That's the point. The empire runs from the Indus to the Aegean, and yet here sits the king, spooning pomegranate snow in slow silence, like it's the most normal thing in the world. Corkier documents, scribbled centuries later by court poets, described the tongue that stings from snow in summer. One anonymous bard writes a line about a sherbet that sings as it melts, like the whisper of mountains in exile. A bit dramatic, but not inaccurate. You reach for another bowl. This one's more adventurous, sweetened grape must, thickened into molasses, mixed with cracked ice and shaved ginger. A bit sticky, but refreshing. A subtle heat follows the chill. You imagine some cook got bold and went off recipe that night. The result? A sleeper hit at the banquet. In some regions, locals also froze fruit whole. Especially figs and dates, wrapped in wet cloth and laid out under starlight, then tucked into Yakhchals the next morning for long storage. A frozen fig on hot day? Absolutely the Persian equivalent of a gourmet chocolate truffle. The engineering of dessert was an elite sport. But what about the rest of the population? Good question. Most commoners didn't have access to Yakhchals. But that doesn't mean they never tasted the goods. During public festivals or royal celebrations, ice and chilled syrups were sometimes handed out in small clay cups. Think of it as early food diplomacy. Keep the people cool, keep them quiet. Historians are divided on how widespread this practice was. Some argue it was limited to larger cities like Susa or Persepolis. Others think even smaller towns had communal ice pits for limited use, especially around Nowruz, the Persian New Year. A shared bowl of snow syrup might symbolize renewal, purity, or, more practically, a rare moment of collective relief from the heat. And what about preservation? Without modern refrigeration, you'd think these frozen treats would vanish instantly in the sun. But some dishes were made fast, served faster. Others use thickening agents, starch, honey, even resin, to slow the melt. And there's even scattered evidence that servants fanned or shaded trays during service to preserve the illusion of permanence. A team effort for a 5-minute pleasure. One final oddity. Some Persian households kept small, personal cooling pits, shallow dugouts near homes, lined with stone or tile, filled with water or shaded snow during celebrations. Whether these were ceremonial or practical remains unclear. But the idea of a backyard dessert cooler? Strangely charming. You glance at the nearly empty dish before you. The last spoonful is mostly melt now, syrupy, slightly warm. Still tasty. Still part of the story. You lean back, full, flushed, and faintly chilled from the inside out. Imagine it, a society that carved comfort out of climate, pleasure out of impossibility, ice cream out of mountain shadows. And all without refrigeration. If that's not impressive, you clearly haven't eaten rose saffron slush in 112-degree heat. The sun is starting to dip now, bathing the courtyard in golden light. You're beginning to feel the strange pull of night, like something inevitable is just around the corner. But for now, let's slow things down. This next chapter is all about quiet moments. It's about the cooling of the day, the settling of the body, the slow, ancient rhythm that the Persians mastered long before the rest of the world caught on. You're sitting with the faintest hint of breeze, the faintest chill. Now imagine you're one of the artisans or laborers who helped build the intricate systems behind the ice storage. You've just finished a long day, and though you're drenched in sweat, your body seems to want to do the exact opposite of what it's been doing all day: become cool, be at rest. You hear the faint whisper of windcatchers, those elegant, tower-like structures designed to catch every breeze in the desert and guide it down into the earth. You wonder if anyone ever thought of this as a form of luxury. You'd think it might be reserved for the nobles, but in a world where comfort comes only with great labor, it seems that everyone benefited from the cool trickle of wind, even in the harshest of climates. The windcatchers, often paired with a cannet system, those underground water channels, provided not just ventilation but actual coolness. Their architectural genius lay in their ability to suck in and direct cool air from the upper reaches of the desert. It wasn't a simple breeze. It was an air conditioning system, designed and installed by some of the most advanced engineers of the ancient world. Historians still debate how much ancient Persian architecture influenced the eventual development of European cooling techniques, but it's easy to imagine how a combination of wind, water, and shade could have led to the concept of refrigeration itself. Cooling was as much about architecture as it was about science. Now let's take a moment to appreciate this incredible feat of design, the cannet. These underground canals, originating from high mountain sources, are designed to bring water to desert settlements without losing too much to evaporation. The water, dripping slowly down from the mountains, would flow through stone tunnels for miles. By the time it reached the village, it was cool, colder, perhaps, than the air in the heat of midday. The Persian Empire's ability to manage water sources like this wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a land that offered little mercy. You notice something strange in your thoughts. Is it the quiet now, or just the fading light? There's something almost meditative in this combination of elements: the cooling air, the quiet trickling of water, the stillness of the evening. Perhaps this is why, for so long, the Persian royal courts used such environments for reflection and even meditation. Everything they built seemed aimed at cultivating a sort of inner peace. Even their architecture seemed built to remind you to slow down, to find tranquility. Think about it. The whole concept of comfort, as we know it today, wasn't always a guaranteed thing. In fact, it's only relatively recently that we have come to expect cooling systems in every home or building. But back then, it was a luxury, something so profoundly rare that only the wealthiest could indulge in these designs. And for everyone else, the kings and nobles probably didn't mind sharing a little of their cooling systems during the hottest parts of the year. After all, it would have been more than just generous. It would have been a strategic move, a way to ensure peace in the empire. This brings us to another fascinating element of Persian society: the way they embedded pleasure into daily life, even when that pleasure was a simple, tangible relief like cool air or frozen fruit. This was more than luxury. It was about enhancing the quality of life, and it had a strategic purpose. By providing coolness, they offered a level of comfort that promoted the well-being of both the elite and commoners alike. It wasn't just an aesthetic choice, but a conscious effort to weave comfort into the fabric of everyday existence. And now, as you continue to settle deeper into this story, it's time to explore the broader implications of how this comfort, this clever blend of engineering and comfort, spread. Imagine those quiet moments in the royal palaces, in the calm of the evening. The servants slowly clean up the remnants of the day's banquet, while the windcatchers continue their gentle work. Somewhere, not far off, someone is probably laughing about the day's little tragedies. You could almost hear it in the silence. Persian palaces had to make their mark. These grandiose spaces weren't just symbolic. They had cooling systems. They had gardens, running water, and efficient storage of ice. They set the standard for what it meant to be comfortable. Not just practical comfort, but an almost spiritual level of coolness. It wasn't just about surviving the heat. It was about relaxing despite it. You stand up, stretch, feeling the slight chill in the air. The evening, like this whole story, is drawn to a close. You're no longer thinking about the hard labor it took to carve out this coolness from the earth. Instead, you're just grateful. Grateful for the ice cream that came from the Yakhchals. Grateful for the windcatchers and the cannons, the underground water that kept everyone cool and at peace. You let yourself smile for a moment as the night deepens. The palace is quieted, and you've wandered a little further now, away from the royalty, away from the elite engineers and their chalked-out cooling schematics. You're heading toward another scene entirely, a massive garden in the desert, blooming where it absolutely shouldn't be blooming. Welcome to a royal banquet. Not one of stiff formalities and scroll readings, but the kind where grapes are passed around like gossip, and platters shimmer with things chilled just slightly past nature's expectations. You find a spot near the edge of a wide fountain, an ingenious display of canned fan excess, and from here, you can see it all. Bronze trays shimmer with figs, dates, cheeses, and what you recognize now as chilled wine goblets, beaded in condensation, like glass mirages in the desert heat. Yes. Even the wine was cold. You might be picturing a few jugs stuck in a river to keep cool, but this was on another level. Persian nobility didn't just tolerate the heat. They staged full-on rebellions against it. One historian even described the Achaemenid summer banquet as a soft war against the climate. So, how do you chill wine in a place where the ground is sun-cracked and sizzling? You already know part of the answer: snow blocks from the Yakhchal, laid gently beneath goblets, or crushed and added directly into a wine bowl. The idea was less about preservation, more about effect. A cold drink turned an ordinary feast into a conversation piece. And these weren't random one-off indulgences. Entire portions of the empire's logistical network were built around keeping the elite refreshed. Caravans delivered snow and ice across scorching plains, guarded like treasure convoys. Couriers dashed between palaces carrying flavored syrups packed in straw. A well-chilled date wine at the right time of year could make or break an alliance. Historians still argue whether these chill-focused banquets were seasonal or constant among the nobility. Some records suggest summer was peak frozen feast season, especially around Noras or royal birthdays. Others hint that the court kept at least one Yakhchal stock year-round, just in case a surprise celebration called for iced melon slices and a mild bout of class flexing. Now picture the scene around you: long rugs on hard-packed earth, the shade of fig trees forming lace patterns on the fabrics. In the center, Dancers sway to the low pulse of a Comanche. Gold anklets jingle softly. Conversation bubbles. You hear someone compliment the saffron ice. You hear someone else complain about the peach sherbet not being cold enough. You lift your own cup. The wine is crisp, floral, and cold enough to make your tongue tingle. It cuts through the heat like a desert breeze. And then there's the serving method. Platters lined with snow. Cups balanced in shallow dishes of meltwater. Metal bowls filled with shaved ice and topped with pomegranate arils or preserved citrus peel. Each dish becomes part of the performance. A hot day turned into cool feeder. Quirkier still, there are mentions, fragmented but compelling, of Persians infusing their chilled wine with herbs and even ground pearls. Whether that was for taste, health, or status, no one can quite agree. One tablet describes a moon wine served cold and dusted with silver. Another mentions a sorbet wine meant for dreams. Is that poetry? Yes. Is it literal? Possibly. But not all of this was for show. There was a health angle too. Persian physicians believed in cooling the internal humors, especially during the dog days of summer. They recommended chilled grape elixirs, diluted and slightly thickened, to calm the spirit and prevent what they called the boiling of blood. Chilled drinks weren't just indulgent. They were medicinal. And for women? Cold drinks at banquets played another role. In elite circles, women participated in feasts more than we often assume. And there are notes, scattered in court poetry and domestic manuals, hinting at chilled drinks being associated with both beauty and fertility. One scribe notes a cooling fig wine tonic to restore the flush of the face and another to preserve a graceful voice. Now you're starting to see the bigger picture. The chilled wine wasn't just about temperature. It was about influence, identity, even gender. You look around at the gathering. The sun is setting. The light softens. Torches flicker along the garden paths. But the trays still glisten with frost, and servants still drift by with tiny cups of snow-packed sweetness. It's a moment suspended. The kind that seems too delicate to last. You close your eyes for a second and try to remember the first sip of that wine. Cool. Brief. Remarkably out of place. Like most luxuries in the desert, the palace is quieted, and you've wandered a little further now, away from the royalty, away from the elite engineers and their chalked-out cooling schematics. You're heading toward another scene entirely, a massive garden in the desert, blooming where it absolutely shouldn't be blooming. Welcome to a royal banquet. Not one of stiff formalities and scroll readings, but the kind where grapes are passed around like gossip, and platters shimmer with things chilled just slightly past nature's expectations. You find a spot near the edge of a wide fountain, an ingenious display of cannet fan excess, and from here, you can see it all. Bronze trays shimmer with figs, dates, cheeses, and what you recognize now as chilled wine goblets, beaded in condensation, like glass mirages in the desert heat. Yes. Even the wine was cold. You might be picturing a few jugs stuck in a river to keep cool, but this was on another level. Persian nobility didn't just tolerate the heat. They staged full-on rebellions against it. One historian even described the Achaemenid summer banquet as a soft war against the climate. So, how do you chill wine in a place where the ground is sun-cracked and sizzling? You already know part of the answer: snow blocks from the Yakhchal, laid gently beneath goblets, or crushed and added directly into a wine bowl. The idea was less about preservation, more about effect. A cold drink turned an ordinary feast into a conversation piece. And these weren't random one-off indulgences. Entire portions of the empire's logistical network were built around keeping the elite refreshed. Caravans delivered snow and ice across scorching plains, guarded like treasure convoys. Couriers dashed between palaces carrying flavored syrups packed in straw. A well-chilled date wine at the right time of year could make or break an alliance. Historians still argue whether these chill-focused banquets were seasonal or constant among the nobility. Some records suggest summer was peak frozen feast season, especially around Noras or royal birthdays. Others hint that the court kept at least one Yakhchal stock year-round, just in case a surprise celebration called for iced melon slices and a mild bout of class flexing. Now picture the scene around you: long rugs on hard-packed earth, the shade of fig trees forming lace patterns on the fabrics. In the center, dancers sway to the low pulse of a Comanche. Gold anklets jingle softly. Conversation bubbles. You hear someone compliment the saffron ice. You hear someone else complain about the peach sherbet not being cold enough. You lift your own cup. The wine is crisp, floral, and cold enough to make your tongue tingle. It cuts through the heat like a desert breeze. And then there's the serving method. Platters lined with snow. Cups balanced in shallow dishes of meltwater. Metal bowls filled with shaved ice and topped with pomegranate arils or preserved citrus peel. Each dish becomes part of the performance. A hot day turned into cool feeder. Quirkier still, there are mentions, fragmented but compelling, of Persians infusing their chilled wine with herbs and even ground pearls. Whether that was for taste, health, or status, no one can quite agree. One tablet describes a moon wine served cold and dusted with silver. Another mentions a sorbet wine meant for dreams. Is that poetry? Yes. Is it literal? Possibly. But not all of this was for show. There was a health angle too. Persian physicians believed in cooling the internal humors, especially during the dog days of summer. They recommended chilled grape elixirs, diluted and slightly thickened, to calm the spirit and prevent what they called the boiling of blood. Chilled drinks weren't just indulgent. They were medicinal. And for women? Cold drinks at banquets played another role. In elite circles, women participated in feasts more than we often assume. And there are notes, scattered in court poetry and domestic manuals, hinting at chilled drinks being associated with both beauty and fertility. One scribe notes a cooling fig wine tonic to restore the flush of the face and another to preserve a graceful voice. Now you're starting to see the bigger picture. The chilled wine wasn't just about temperature. It was about influence, identity, even gender. You look around at the gathering. The sun is setting. The light softens. Torches flicker along the garden paths. But the trays still glisten with frost, and servants still drift by with tiny cups of snow-packed sweetness. It's a moment suspended. The kind that seems too delicate to last. You close your eyes for a second and try to remember the first sip of that wine. Cool. Brief. Remarkably out of place. Like most luxuries in the desert. You rise early the next morning, not that you slept much. The desert has a way of whispering into your dreams, even when you're curled beneath blankets heavy with dust and the scent of saffron. Today, you're not feasting or watching snow being stacked like treasure. You're going to witness the closest thing the Persians had to sorcery, ice made in the desert without snow, without mountains, just the night air, the stars, and the wind. The trick? Something called a badger. You might know it as a windcatcher. You approach a low stone building on the edge of a settlement. From a distance, it looks like a minaret with a split personality. A tall tower juts upward, carved with vertical slits that face in 4 different directions. It hums faintly in the early morning breeze. Below it, a long, narrow pool, shallow as a saucer and shaded by mud walls. Welcome to the ancient Persian air conditioning lab. The badger works like this. During the night, cold air flows down the vertical slits of the tower. The geometry is clever. It traps the denser, cooler air and pushes it downward into the building below. Meanwhile, the shallow pool is filled just after sunset. With the dry desert air and plummeting night temperatures, the water begins to lose heat rapidly. Sometimes, under the right conditions, it even freezes. That's right, Persians made ice in the desert at night. No snow required. Historians still argue how widespread this method was, and whether it consistently produced full ice sheets or just a slushy skim. But it worked well enough to earn mentions in multiple architectural records. Even if the ice layer was thin, it could be collected, stacked, and stored in Yakhchals by morning. You dip your fingers into the pool. It's shallow. The water is chilled, the surface misting slightly in the morning air. A boy with a wide straw hat walks slowly along the edge, skimming something into a bucket. Shaved ice. He looks up and smiles without stopping. There's a particular genius in this method. No brute force. No caravans. Just timing. Evaporative cooling, stillness, and patience. While much of the empire focused on hauling snow from the mountains, in the arid plains where snow never fell, people learned to make cold. Quirkier still, some windcatcher towers were connected to entire underground homes. The cool air would flow not just over a pool, but through sleeping chambers, kitchens, even storage cellars. One archaeological site in Yazd, centuries after the Achaemenids, shows that families used these passive cooling systems well into the 19th century. Think of it as living inside a natural refrigerator with no electricity bill. You wander into the home attached to this windcatcher. The clay walls are smooth, faintly damp with morning dew. Inside, a pile of fresh figs rests on a stone shelf. Next to it, a tray of something pale and soft, milk pudding, you think, left overnight to chill. Someone here understands the rhythm of cold air, of how it dips and flows like water. A woman enters from a back room, nods politely, and sets down a small ceramic bowl. It's filled with a kind of lemony ice pulp, likely made from that paper-thin layer skimmed off the pool. She adds a few mint leaves, pats the side of the bowl, and leaves without a word. You taste it. It's rough. Crystalline. Not sweet, not rich, just cold. Honest. Somehow more refreshing than the elaborate courtly desserts. It makes sense, doesn't it? The people who need the cold most don't have time for silver spoons. They need results. These badgers weren't just cooling devices. They were symbols of regional pride. In cities like Yazd and Kerman, entire neighborhoods became wind trap mosaics. Some homes had multiple towers, adjusted for seasonal wind shifts. The more towers you had, the more respectable your estate was. Richer families even built false towers, non-functional ones, just to keep up appearances. Historians still argue whether windcatchers originated with the Persians or were adapted from earlier Mesopotamian structures. But it was in Persia that they flourished, adapted, replicated, and eventually exported across the Islamic world. Cairo, Baghdad, even parts of India and Pakistan show traces of Persian windcatcher influence. Back outside, the sun has begun to warm the air. The boy is gone now, the pool drained for the day. The tower is quiet, its morning work complete. You realize something: this method wasn't designed for parties. It wasn't built for kings. It was for survival. For preserving milk. For chilling water. For helping someone sleep in midsummer without waking drenched in heat. And yet, it's beautiful. Unflashy, modest, miraculous in its restraint. You stand beneath the windcatcher, feeling the last of the night air slide down your arms. A single drop of condensation falls from the clay edge and lands with a soft plip on the ground. In the desert, even the smallest chill is a triumph. The day is heating up again, as it always does. The wind has gone lazy, curling dust into lazy spirals, and the sun, unapologetic, unblinking, settles itself like a hot stone on your back. You're now standing in the heart of a bustling Persian village, where cold is no longer a royal indulgence but a form of currency. Welcome to the chilly underbelly of the empire's economy. You make your way through a shaded market alley, brushing past hanging dates, baskets of dried apricots, and clay jugs glistening with moisture. A young vendor fancies pomegranate syrup stand, not to cool himself, but to keep the ants off. But just behind him is something more precious, a cube of ice, wrapped in cloth and nestled in a shallow bowl of sawdust. It's not for sale. It's a deposit. In this world, ice isn't just a luxury, it's part of a trade network. You follow a delivery boy on his midday rounds. His donkey carries two well-wrapped satchels, each swinging rhythmically with every step. Inside, blocks of snow, cut hours earlier from a local Yakhchal, still solid thanks to straw and patience. The boy stops at a tea seller's cart, where a small metal box is waiting, still frosted on the inside. They swap the ice for a token. Not a coin, this is barter. The tea seller promises him 2 bowls of lentils next week. Historians still debate how formalized this system was, but there's enough evidence, ledgers etched into wooden tablets, seals bearing snowflake-shaped motifs, to suggest that, in some regions, ice had genuine economic weight. It was taxed, rationed, even reserved in advance for local physicians and dignitaries. In hotter cities, entire guilds may have formed around ice delivery and distribution, each with their own routes, permissions, and cooling rights. You pass a perfume stall next. The vendor is stirring a paste of rose oil and powdered sandalwood. She lifts the lid on a tiny clay pot packed with snow and scoops out a small lump. Into it, she presses a sliver of lemon peel and a few drops of jasmine essence. Keeps the scent sharp, she explains. And the customers longer. You nod. That makes sense. After all, who wants to haggle when your armpits are sweating through your robe? Then comes the apothecary. This isn't your average medicine man. Its shelves are lined with tiny labeled jars, poppy resin, dried plum skins, powdered carob, even crushed amber. But beneath the table is the real treasure, a small pit filled with last week's snow. In it, he stores compress cloths, chilled water skins, and even a few medicinal syrups that must be served cool to balance the body's fire. He sees you eyeing the pit and winks. For fevers, he says. And heartbreak. Quirkier still, there's evidence of a Persian practice known as tabdili yak, ice exchanging, where families or merchants could temporarily trade goods or services for access to cold storage. Need to keep your melon fresh for tomorrow's sale? Pay the local snowkeeper a bundle of twine and a promise of dried figs. No money needed, just favors, timing, and the unspoken rule of don't touch someone else's snow. Of course, this didn't always go smoothly. Disputes arose. Who got first pick on the hottest day? Was it fair to store personal food next to medicine? One document suggests a minor brawl in a village near Pasargadi after someone allegedly swapped their melting snow block for a larger one with fewer visible holes. That's right, snow fraud. Historians still argue about the legal status of Yakhchals. Were they public utilities? Privately owned? Semi-sacred civic tools? The truth is probably all of the above. Some were built by wealthy nobles for family use. Others were community-funded. A few may have even been temple-adjacent, used in ritual cooling in summer festivals. What's not debated is the reverence people held for them. You hear it in the way merchants talk. The snow pit isn't just a building, it's the reason fruit doesn't spoil, weddings don't wilt, and old mothers with summer fevers get to see autumn. You round a corner and see a small girl dragging a basket of flatbread. She pauses at the edge of a shaded Yakhchal entrance and whispers something you don't quite catch. Then she tosses a date into the air and skips off. You smile. Even kids know where the cool lives. At the edge of town, a large wooden board is pinned to a post. It's a schedule, of sorts, marking snow deliveries, melt forecasts, in which stalls are due their next ration. You see symbols instead of words, a fig, a spoon, a jug, a bundle of herbs. It's simple, effective, and frankly, smarter than most office calendars. In a way, the whole village runs like a fridge. Heat comes for everything, eventually, but until then, there's order. Rot is delayed. Sickness soothed. Tea cooled. And beneath it all, the Yakhchal. Patient. Unblinking. Always colder than it needs to be. You leave the market with a few mint leaves tucked in your palm, the smell trailing you like a memory. The sun is still blazing. But now you see it differently. Because in this economy, cold isn't the absence of heat. It's the presence of power. The market fades behind you as the road stretches wider, quieter. You pass goats, stoic as ever, and farmers in floppy straw hats, slowly stomping the rhythm of empire into the dirt. It's time now to pull back the map and take a wider look, because the Persians didn't keep their snow to themselves. You're heading toward the edges of the Achaemenid Empire, following the slow, warm breeze of shared ideas. And in this case, the idea was simple: cold is clever. At its height, the empire stretched from the Indus Valley to the Nile, from the Persian Gulf to the Aegean Sea. It was a land stitched together by trade, tribute, and, of course, messengers riding like the wind. But not everything was about conquest or taxes. Some of the most quietly influential exports were techniques, practices, habits that clung to new places the way snow clings to straw. Yakhchals were among them. Now, to be clear, nobody rolled up to Babylon and plopped down a mud brick cone labeled ice thing, "Do not touch." But Persian administrators, engineers, and merchants moved constantly, bringing with them blueprints not on paper, but in practice. You arrive now in a small Egyptian settlement under Achaemenid rule. The landscape feels familiar, dry, cracked, humming with heat. But instead of Persian cypress, you're surrounded by palm fronds and mud brick homes shaped like stacked dice. And tucked behind a low-slung granary, a structure that makes you blink. It's roundish, thick-walled. Not quite a Yakhchal, but close. Local workers tend to it carefully, scooping out layers of something cool, wrapping it in linen, and loading it onto carts. You approach. It's not snow, it's a slush of silt-filtered water, mixed with plant ash and cooled in overnight trays. No mountains nearby. No winter caravans. Just adaptation. Historians still debate whether Egyptians adopted Persian-style cold storage under duress or delight. But they did adapt parts of it, often blending it with their own water channeling techniques. Some villages near the Nile even created cooling wells, dug deep with clay linings to keep water at a usable chill throughout the dry season. You sit beside one now, dipping your hand into water that feels like dusk. Not cold, exactly, but cool enough to preserve cheese, or soothe a sunburn. The local baker tells you that a fig left overnight in this well stays firm till morning. It's not snow, she says, but it's clever. That could be the motto of empire, not snow, but clever. Quirkier still, you find a note etched into a wall, likely written by a board worker. "When pharaohs ruled, we boiled. Now we shiver under foreign clouds." A complaint? Maybe. Or maybe just sarcasm. Hard to tell with ancient graffiti. You journey on, westward now, toward Mesopotamia. Here in Babylon, the sun hits differently, drier, flatter, meaner. But the canals are wide, the stone buildings dense with shadow. You're directed toward a merchant compound where dates are chilled before export. A servant shows you a wide, shallow pool partially shaded by angled walls. It's not Persian designed, exactly, but the influence is obvious. More importantly, the concept of cold as commodity has taken root. In Babylon, date syrup mixed with chilled water is sold in ceramic cups by street vendors. The cups are rough, the slush clumpy, but it's cold. And in a city like this, that means something. People line up for it like it's medicine. And it kind of is. Records from the region suggest local healers adopted the Persian use of snow and cool water in treatments. Poultices soaked in chilled wine. Fever tinctures stored in clay jars inside earth pits. One tablet even lists snow leaf compresses for head heat. Historians still argue what plant snow leaf actually refers to, but it sounds nice, doesn't it? From here, your path bends north. Across the Zagros and toward the highlands of Armenia, where Achaemenid governors ruled from stone fortresses wrapped in pine forests. It's colder here. Snow is easy to come by. But storing it, that's the trick. You find what looks like a primitive Yakhchal, dug partially into a slope, its entrance faced away from sunlight. Inside, crates of apples sit nestled in damp straw. A shepherd tells you the fruit can last a month this way. We learned it from the Southerners, he says, meaning the Persians. You nod. Another snowprint left behind. Quirkier still? Some distant provinces took the cold craze to unusual lengths. In Bactria, roughly modern Afghanistan, high-altitude settlements developed what one traveler called sky freezers, wide flat rooftops used to freeze water at night and stack it for later sale. Snow became a form of tribute. Bring ice, not silver, one local chief supposedly declared. Did the Persians expect their chilly obsession to spread this far? Probably not. But influence isn't always grand. Sometimes it's just a villager whispering, you know, they store snow down south, and suddenly your neighbors are digging pits and measuring shade angles. As you return to the empire's heart, dusty and sun-paint, you realize what's really been passed around isn't just a method, it's a mindset. Cold is possible. Cold is worth the work. Cold belongs here. You wipe your brow and glance up at the sky, blue and infinite. No clouds. No snow. But beneath the earth, someone is already building a dome to trap winter before it leaves. The desert begins to shimmer again, mirage-like and surreal, as your feet return to familiar Persian ground. But this time, the chill feels a little less magical. You've seen its reach, adapted in wells, rooftops, trenches, and now your curiosity turns inward, toward the science. The practicality. The possibility. Because while everyone agrees that Persian Yakhchals stored ice, not everyone agrees how well they really worked. Historians, archaeologists, and architectural engineers still tangle over the question, were Yakhchals truly efficient, year-round freezers? Or were they glorified coolers, slowing the melt but never quite stopping it? You step into the shadow of one again now. It's empty. Quiet. The snow long since gone. And yet the dome still exhales cold, like a memory it hasn't quite let go. At its best, a Yakhchal could reportedly preserve snow well into midsummer. Some sources even suggest storage into early autumn. But how much snow was lost? How often were blocks replenished? Were ice-making techniques like nighttime evaporative freezing used in tandem to top up the pit? We don't know. That's the truth, even if it's a little less romantic than we'd like. For all their grandeur, most Yakhchals left behind no blueprints, no manuals, no temperature logs. What remains are walls, pits, and clever guesses. So, you follow the trail of those guesses. One modern researcher built a scale model of a Yakhchal using traditional materials, fit clay walls, a conical roof, in a small ice pit below. Using weather data from Yazd, they tracked internal temperature fluctuations for 6 months. The result? The pit stayed cooler than ambient air by 15 to 20 degrees Celsius during summer, but ice didn't always survive without replenishment. Other teams focused on passive cooling theories. They measured airflow patterns, calculated the angle of windcatcher vents, studied nighttime radiation loss. Some concluded that yes, under the right conditions, with dry air, clear skies, and no sun intrusion, small amounts of water could freeze overnight. But only in the coldest regions of Persia. Not in the searing lowlands where royal palaces flourished. So where did all that summer snow come from? That's the part most agree on: mountain snow harvests. You've already trudged those paths, heard the donkeys, seen the satchels packed tight with winter. Without those icy caravans, even the cleverest dome would have just been a cool cave. You crouch beside the base of the Yakhchal again and press your hand to the wall. The mud is rough and pitted but dry as bone. It doesn't look like science. It looks like a sandcastle after a storm. And yet, it held cold. Somehow. One quirky theory even proposes that workers layered salt between snow blocks to slow melt, creating a kind of ancient refrigeration chemistry set. Others suggest they added vinegar to ice, creating a brine slush that lasted longer. These ideas have limited textual support, but they've shown up in oral histories and folk recipes. One grandmother in Shiraz once claimed her family made summer snow last till pomegranates burst with nothing more than dried citrus peel in a well-packed pit. Do we believe her? Maybe not fully. But her belief matters. Historians are still fascinated by the persistence of the form. Even when ice became easier to source, from imported blocks or later, mechanical systems, people continued to use Yakhchals. Some scholars think it wasn't just tradition. It was quiet reference for a system that had worked, mostly, for centuries. Think about it: if a mud dome can hold winter in its belly for months without moving parts or fire, you'd honor that, too. And there are deeper mysteries. Some Yakhchals were built without nearby cannons, without shade walls, without windcatchers. Did they fail? Did they have hidden features now lost? Were they symbolic more than functional? One long-standing debate centers around a particularly enormous Yakhchal near Kerman. It could reportedly store thousands of cubic feet of snow, and some say it even supplied entire town districts. But newer excavations show no clear drainage pit, leading some to wonder if it ever worked as advertised, or if stories inflated its greatness over time. Still, walk into it on a hot day, and the air feels different. Cooler. Still. You feel it in your throat. Maybe that's all the evidence you need. Science wants measurements, proof, data. But people remember feeling. They remember the hush inside a dome. The moment warm breath became fog. The relief of snow syrup melting on a fevered tongue. And maybe that's the truest legacy of Persian cold keeping, not the exact degree Celsius, but the stubborn belief that even in heat, coolness could exist. That comfort could be created with mud and geometry. That the sun could be challenged, and not always win. You lean back against the Yakhchal wall, listening to the air slip past the tiny opening above. It makes no sound. No boast. Just presence. Efficient? Maybe. Effective? Ask your skin. You rise slowly from the Yakhchal floor, limbs a little stiff, skin still tingling from the cool. The sky outside is thick with late afternoon gold. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd sings off-key. But closer, closer, you hear laughter. Light, quick, unmistakably feminine. It's time to talk about another side of this story, less documented, more whispered. The roles women played in the life of cold. You make your way through a narrow alley toward the women's quarters of a modest estate. These aren't royal women, not the highborn consorts of palaces or the legendary figures scribbled in the margins of old texts. These are the wives of scribes, sisters of priests, daughters of merchants. And yet, in many ways, they were the keepers of cold. You peek through a carved wooden door, catching the scent of rosewater and sesame. Inside, a trio of women are crouched around the low ceramic bowl, stirring a slush of crushed herbs, flower petals, and the last bits of morning snow. One of them, older, points toward a folded bundle of linen. "For Afsane," she says. "She's burning again. Fever medicine." Historians often gloss over this part. The focus is usually on grand architecture, royal logistics, public feasts. But cold in ancient Persia wasn't just ceremonial, it was deeply personal. And women knew its uses better than most. In the corner, a younger girl adds something to the bowl, a dark syrup. Mulberry, maybe. Not for healing. For flavor. She grins when she sees you watching and says something that sounds suspiciously like, "He looks like he's never had real sherbet before." Fair point. It's not hard to imagine the countless private moments like this, hidden from scrolls and steel. Snow used to cool swelling, to dull pain, to soften childbirth, to refresh aching feet. In households that were lucky enough to access communal Yakhchals, women were often the ones who portioned out the snow, wrapped it in linen, turned it into usable forms. They were pharmacists, cooks, and comforters, all at once. There's even fringe evidence that women ran some small-scale cooling pits. Not the massive Yakhchals, but smaller clay-lined cellars used to store food, water, and on rare occasion, a single block of ice bought from a passing merchant. These cooling pits, called garmabakanas in some dialects, may have doubled as spaces for ritual washing, healing, and female-centered gatherings. One poem from the late Sassanid period hands a Snowell bride, a young woman betrothed to a merchant who brought her a block of ice every seventh day. She marked his love and melt in measure, it reads. It's half fairy tale, half love song, and completely charming. And let's talk beauty. In elite circles, snow wasn't just healthful, it was fashionable. Recipes for face masks included crushed snow with goat milk, honey, and turmeric. Others used cold compresses soaked in rosewater and mint to tighten the gaze and still the flush of sun. Historians still argue whether these rituals were purely aesthetic or symbolic. Some say they were linked to fertility ceremonies. Others think they were simply practical, sensible ways to survive and silk under the desert sun. Either way, they left a mark. There are quieter records too, women tucking bits of ice into clay jars, adding a sprig of basil or lemon peel before setting it on a shaded windowsill. The goal wasn't preservation. It was ambience. A fragrant coolness, drifting across a sleeping child. A gift from snow, long after it had melted. Quirkier still, some folktales tell of women using chilled syrup or snow wine to rebel, subtly, silently. One story from Fars tells of a clever daughter who laced her stepfather's wine with frozen vinegar slush to induce uncontrollable sneezing during a public speech. Another tale has a widow pretending to faint from heat so her son-in-law would carry her to the cool cellar and miss a meeting with creditors. Are these tales true? Maybe not entirely. But they speak to an unspoken truth: cold could be power. Even without scrolls or titles, women used it. Shaped it. Bent it toward protection and quiet influence. and yet they're mostly invisible in the formal histories. You feel that absence now as you watch the three women finish their bowl. The older one dips a cloth into the slush, folds it carefully, and places it on her brow for just a moment. She sighs, eyes fluttering shut. The others smile softly. Not grand celebration. Not royal spectacle. Just relief. You step back into the alley, the air suddenly warmer by comparison. The scent of crushed herbs lingers in your nose. Not every snow story belongs to kings. Some live in shadowed courtyards, in bowls stirred by quiet hands, in songs half-hummed over melting medicine. And those are the ones that never truly melt away. The sun is lower now, painting the dunes in slow gold. You move without urgency, there's nowhere left to be, really, except back at the heart of things. But as you pass another crumbling Yakhchal, half swallowed by sand and time, a different feeling sets in. Something quieter. Heavier. Endings. Because like all ingenious systems, Persian ice-keeping eventually faded. Tonight, you're going to follow the slow melt of the Yakhchal era. Not a collapse, not a catastrophe, just a long exhale of relevance. A gentle warming. You sit beneath a half-broken dome, watching a lone palm tree sway in the dry hush. This Yakhchal, once proud and cold, is cracked along one side. A family of swallows has made its home in the vent. A shepherd occasionally uses the base for shade. But inside? No snow. No shimmer. Just wind. So, what happened? Historians generally point to a few familiar culprits. First, the conquests. The Arab invasions of the 7th century, followed by Mongols, Timurids, and others, destabilized much of the infrastructure that supported long-term projects like Yakhchal maintenance. Roads became less secure. Labor was redirected to fortresses, not domes. But conquest alone isn't the full story. Empires are always shifting. The bigger change was technological and cultural. In time, more communities moved closer to rivers, springs, and coastal areas. Fresh water became the focus, not stored snow. Windcatchers continued to thrive. After all, they helped with living comfort, but the large, labor-intensive snow pits became less practical. Why maintain a giant mud dome when trade routes could bring imported ice from northern mountains or even, eventually, Europe? By the time the Safavids rolled around in the 16th century, many Yakhchals were either ceremonial or symbolic. A few royal ones remained in use for court rituals or major festivals. But for the average person, the Yakhchal became more like a dusty shrine to an old idea. Cold was still desirable, but it came from different hands now. Quirkier still. Some records suggest Yakhchals were occasionally repurposed as granaries, prayer spaces, even underground theaters during hot months. One traveler in the 18th century described hearing a string quartet echoing inside a retired Yakhchal in Shiraz. The music curled against the dome like fog, he wrote. And I forgot it was meant for snow. Historians still debate whether these structures were forgotten or simply outgrown. One theory posits that the knowledge wasn't lost, it just became less urgent. With changing diets, trade, and the arrival of mechanical cooling systems, cold became common. Easy. No longer a miracle, just a setting on a dial. And when miracles become mundane, they slip away unnoticed. there's also the climate factor. Some researchers believe subtle shifts in regional weather made ice harvesting harder over time. Less snow in key ranges. Hotter nights, making evaporative freezing less effective. A Yakhchal without snow is like a lyre with no strings, beautiful, but silent. You walk now around the perimeter of the abandoned dome. Bits of straw poke from the crumbling saruj. Someone's carved initials into the wall. Modern. Sloppy. Probably from a bored teenager waiting for the bus. Still, the dome holds. Even cracked, even hollow, it stands. That might be the part that lingers longest. Not the ice, or the sherbet, or the saffron snowballs served on silver. But the structure itself, patient, passive, quietly waiting for someone to remember. And they do. Today, a few Yakhchals have been restored by historians, preservationists, even architects fascinated by sustainable cooling. In Yazd, you can tour one. Stand inside it. Feel the hush. They don't make ice there anymore. But they make stories. They make memory. One student, sketching near the entrance, told a visitor, "It's like standing inside someone else's solution." You sit again, leaning against the dome. The sand creeps in. The light softens. You think about how easy it is to forget a miracle when it stops being rare. But the desert remembers. It remembers the sweat of the workers, the glide of the ice blocks, the clink of sherbet cups, the hush of mothers pressing snow to fevered foreheads. It remembers the ambition, the ingenuity, the soft rebellion against the sun. And you? You remember now too. You reach into your satchel and pull out a fig, slightly warm, a little soft, but still whole. You bite. It's sweet. Summer sweet. But you can almost taste winter in its skin. The last snow melted long ago. But the chill remains, somewhere underfoot. The sky is deepening now, the colors bleeding from gold to indigo, and the stars, those ancient pinpricks of light, begin to peek through the velvet curtain above. You've circled the empire. You've traced the ice. You've followed snow down mountains and through markets, into medicine bowls and banquet cups. Now, for this final chapter, let's go back, quietly, gently, to where it all began. You return to the original Yakhchal. The one you visited under moonlight. Only now, it stands silent in the twilight, casting a long, cool shadow across the earth. The birds have stopped singing. Even the wind has gone soft. You're alone. But not lonely. You wander the outer wall slowly, hand trailing over the rough clay. The structure is cracked in places, but still firm, still standing, like an old friend waiting to tell one last story. Inside, the pit is empty. Not a single snowflake remains. But you see signs of life, bundles of straw from a recent school visit, chalk marks from a preservation team, even a forgotten plastic water bottle tucked in a corner. Oops. The past, it seems, is always negotiating with the present. You sit on the edge of the pit. It's cooler down here, even without ice. The earth remembers the cold, holds onto it like a lullaby. And now, imagine it, one final dessert. This one isn't served on silver, or sung about by poets. It's simple. A clay cup. A spoon carved from wood. Inside, just a little snow, crushed in flavor with a dash of sour grape molasses and a few pomegranate seeds. No fanfare. No applause. Just you, the night, and something cold to hold on to. You take a bite. It melts fast, as all beautiful things do. But for a second, it's perfect. A chill that speaks across time. A whisper from a snow harvester you never met, a banquet you never attended, a fever you never had. A memory made new. Historians still argue about the legacy of the Yakhchals. Were they truly revolutionary? Were they widespread? Were they sacred, or just clever? The answer is probably yes. To all of it. And to none of it. Because like all enduring things, they're a little bit real and a little bit myth. You sit in silence for a while longer. The stars begin to settle. The earth cools beneath you. And you realize that this whole journey, mud domes, snow caravans, rose sherbet, wind towers, fig pits, whisper graffiti, wasn't really about ice. It was about comfort. The kind that requires effort. Ingenuity. Maybe even defiance. Because comfort doesn't just arrive. You have to build it. Shape it. Store it in mud domes and pass it from hand to hand. Across deserts. Across centuries. And even when the snow melts, the idea of it stays. Just before you drift off, one last breeze finds its way into the empty Yakhchal. It swirls past your ear, barely there, and you swear it says, "Still cold enough." Word count, 1052. Wind down, 300 words. And now, as the desert settles and your eyelids grow heavy, let the story slip beneath your thoughts like cool water in the sand. You've wandered far tonight, past palaces and pastures, through windcatchers and whispers, following a thread of ice through the heat of ancient Persia. You've seen the labor, the laughter, the quiet pride of people who dared to shape comfort out of climate. There's something deeply calming in knowing that, long before light bulbs and freezer doors, human hands were already solving the riddle of the sun. Not by fighting it, but by listening. Adapting. Stacking snow beneath clay domes, storing relief for the hard days to come. You might not taste rose syrup sherbet tonight, or press a snow-wrapped cloth to your brow. But the calm that lingers, that's yours to keep. The hush of a Yakhchal. The quiet chill beneath the earth. The knowledge that somewhere, even now, the wind still hums through old mud bricks, carrying the promise of coolness into tomorrow. So breathe a little slower now. Let your thoughts settle like straw across the ice. Let the air turn soft against your cheeks. You've earned your rest, dear traveler of time. And if you dream tonight, maybe it'll be of fig trees in bloom, snow resting quietly in clay pits, and a cold drink passed from hand to hand under the stars. You're safe. You're still. You're home now. Sleep well.